Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Gallery, Singapore. As some of you may know, our museum opened just under 2 months ago in November last year. The highlight of our opening was the launch of our 2 permanent exhibitions. The exhibition, Between Declarations and Dreams, presents a history of art from Southeast Asia from the 19th century to the present. The title is taken from a 1948 poem by acclaimed Indonesian poet Khairul Anwar. The other exhibition, which presents a history of art from Singapore, is entitled Siapa Nama Kamu. The Malay phrase translates into English as, "What is your name?" and is taken from the iconic 1959 painting, National Language Class, by Singapore artist Chua Mia Tee. Last night, we opened 2 new exhibitions in our concourse at galleries. A Fact Has No Appearance, Art Beyond the Object, and Earthwork, 1979. A Fact Has No Appearance looks at 3 seminal figures of Southeast Asian art and their interventions in the 1970s. Johnny Manahan from the Philippines, Retsa Piadasa from Malaysia, and Tan Teng Kee from Malaysia and Singapore. These 3 artists broke new ground in Southeast Asian modern art by challenging the boundaries of painting, sculpture, photography, video, and performance. The exhibition features original artworks, photographs, and documents. Earthwork 1979 has a tighter focus. The exhibition is a restaging of a single project by one of Singapore's most regarded contemporary artists. Tang Da Wu, who was at the forefront of a transformation in the local artistic landscape in the 1980s and 1990s. The exhibition presents selected works from Tang's seminal project Earthwork from 1979 to 1980. Earthwork was perhaps the earliest land art project in Singapore. Tang created earthworks on a site in an empty field that was cleared for development, which were then later presented in a gallery context. It was shown at the National Museum Art Gallery in 1980, which was a precursor art institution to National Gallery, Singapore. The occasion today, however, is a symposium and not an exhibition. Of course, for us here at National Gallery, Singapore, the work of making exhibitions and researching art history are deeply intertwined. Today's symposium is part of Ambitious Alignments, New Histories of Southeast Asian Art. Ambitious Alignments is a research program that brings together early career scholars from Australia and Southeast Asia, with the aim of developing their professional networks and encouraging their own individual research projects. The general direction of the program is to chart the complex trajectories of artists, ideas, and artworks that help shape the art worlds of Southeast Asia, with a focus on the years between 1945 and 1990. This is a period characterized by decolonization and independence, as well as the struggles for democracy and the geopolitical conflicts and tensions of the Cold War era. The Ambitious Alignments group first met in Sydney in March last year, and then again in August in Bandung. The meetings here in Singapore are the final part of the program. Ambitious Alignments is funded through the Getty Foundation's Connecting Art Histories initiative, and is developed by the Power Institute Foundation for Art and Visual Culture at the University of Sydney, in cooperation with regional partners, the Institute of Technology in Bandung and National Gallery, Singapore. Professor Mark Ledbury from Sydney is here with us today, and I will leave it to him to say more about the program. I am very pleased that we are hosting the research participants and field leaders from Ambitious Alignments. This occasion is especially significant to us because it signals not only our commitment to building partnerships with research institutions such as the University of Sydney and the Institute of Technology, Bandung, but also because it emphasizes how important research is to the gallery. I'd like to dwell on a couple of issues. Firstly, the issue of names, and secondly, the concept of the new. I suppose what stands out in our own name, National Gallery Singapore, is the term national. But the reality is that while the gallery may bear the name national, it is a new national institution. And also, it finds itself in a position where it has a responsibility to reflect on, from the very start, what it means to be a national art gallery at this particular moment in history. Typically, when one thinks of national institutions, what may come to mind is an institution that has been around since the beginning of the nation. One thinks of an older institution that has a mission of earnestly being a custodian of national identity. That's not quite the tradition and mission of our gallery. I'll elaborate more about this later. But let us stay on the topic of art. When it comes to art, the gallery's mission is to consider art in its historical context and to look at artworks that were made sufficiently far enough in the past so that we can have a considered historical perspective on these works. However, by virtue of the conditions of its formation, the gallery is in many ways an art institution of the contemporary moment. For a start, it has to be responsive to whatever new developments are happening in art historical research. History is a dynamic field. Moreover, the fact is, when it comes to Southeast Asia, the field of art history is relatively underdeveloped. In comparison to Europe, for example, we do not have volumes and volumes of existing art history. Nevertheless, there is already a body of writing on Southeast Asia, a body of writing that is neglected and in need of further discussion and analysis. This is an aspect which we are also addressing to some of our other projects. But most of the writing of art history of Southeast Asia will be new. Certainly, the new research that is being produced, for instance, by the participants in the Ambitious Alignments program, this research will rely on carefully attending to archives, to older artworks and documents, and so on. But these researchers must also question their methods, asking themselves, are there new or different ways to look at this material? 20 years ago, as contemporary art from the region was becoming more visible in major international exhibitions like Biennales, the field of Southeast Asian art was emerging as a research topic. 2 or 3 decades ago, if you surveyed the art history departments in the universities in Europe and North America, where the majority of art history was being produced, if you found research on Asia, let alone Southeast Asia, it would be about ancient art and culture. Rarely would it be about the modern, and you'd be very hard-pressed to find someone working on the contemporary. All that has changed. New centers of research have been established, but it is worth noting that the field of Southeast Asian art history emerged partly in response to the growing visibility of contemporary Southeast Asian art in international exhibitions. For Southeast Asia, contemporary art helped to catalyze an interest in the modern, because one has to go back to history to understand what is happening now. It was during the 1990s when talk about finding new vocabularies to describe the art of the region began to circulate. But one has to be careful here as well. What exactly do we mean by new vocabularies or new methodologies? Just saying that art history will be written from an Asian perspective is no guarantee that it will be written through new or different methodologies. Coming up in March, National Gallery Singapore will collaborate with Centre Pompidou in Paris on the exhibition Reframing Modernism. This project seeks to address some of these issues and to reframe existing paradigms for the understanding of modernist painting. Some notable past survey exhibitions that have examined modern art from Asia include Cubism in Asia in 2006 and Realism in Asian art in 2010. In both cases, the question of influence seems to have dominated the curatorial frameworks. How did Asian artists engage art historical movements and terms that first came out of the West? But that question of influence can also be a trap. It may seem to ask for an Asian perspective, but the context for this perspective is framed by conversation amongst Asians. It's framed by a conversation not amongst Asians, but between Asia and the West. The question of what is an Asian or Southeast Asian, or even a Singaporean perspective, brings me back to my earlier topic concerning the term national, which is prominent in the name of our new institution. Today's art museums function as anchor points in the fast-changing cultural landscapes of our contemporary societies. But while museums can ground us in a common culture, sometimes called a national culture, they also provide a platform for us to ask questions about our culture, and also questions about the role of our cultural institutions. It is significant for a national institution in Southeast Asia, and especially in Singapore, to be quite forward in not taking the term national or the regional for granted, but instead to use these terms as starting points for re-examination. So how can national galleries, which are tied to national histories, tell stories of art that are responsive to the changing conditions of art today? Do they transport audiences back in time, or do they bring heritage forward to the present? How are the public functions of these institutions changing? What does it mean to go beyond a national art history? What exactly is a regional, international, or global perspective? And how should one reevaluate the role of national galleries? How might they reinvent themselves? These are questions that should continue to provoke us at the gallery for some time to come, and I cannot offer any simple questions right here. But I can say that our responses to this set of challenges will be grounded in our attitude towards research. When we make our exhibitions, our research must invariably be extensive. But research is also sometimes best done when it is free from always being in the service of any one particular project with fast approaching deadlines. As such, empowering the capacity for research is also essential to our mission. Finally, let me address the name ambitious alignments. The word ambitious is probably what one might expect to register first and foremost. Yes, of course, the ambition of this program is something to reckon with. Writing new histories for Southeast Asia is not only an urgent undertaking, but it's a task that must be engaged with a sense of ambition and clarity of purpose. But perhaps it is the word alignment that is more interesting here. The word alignment would usually suggest careful placement and typically in a straight line. But that is not how I read the word in this context. Ambitious alignment seems to suggest to me something looser and more open, and yet nevertheless, there is this image of precise placement, of careful decisions, of looking at the object from various angles and perspectives until one finds the right position, and then one finds a place from which to speak. So welcome to the symposium. I'd like to thank all the participants, our partners, and as always, my team at the National Gallery. And most importantly, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for coming and being a part of our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. I'll now like to invite Professor Mark Ledbury, Power Professor, University of Sydney, to introduce the Ambitious Alignments Research Program.
Good morning and welcome everybody, and to all our participants and to everyone who's come to hear. I realise that this is very much the warm-up period in the sense that the real meat awaits you after tea, the projects and the scholars themselves. But I thought I would begin, and I did have a PowerPoint presentation, but it doesn't matter, I can work in its absence just as well, or maybe I should just simply wait and something miraculous will happen. But what I first want to say, and a very big thank you on behalf of everyone at Sydney and everyone involved in the project, to our colleagues, partners and collaborators at the National Gallery of Singapore, to Eugene and all his team, to all the curators who gave so much of their time and energy and thought to take our scholars around, the generosity in every way of the gallery as a partner and as a host has been remarkable, and we're really grateful to them, as we are to our partners at ITB in Bandung, who equally demonstrated commitment and generosity and a real dedication to making this project work. And so I would like to thank everyone, and of course, I would also like to thank someone who is absent today, but whose individual work sort of meant that we all actually got here and got everywhere, and that is, of course, Yvonne Lowe. And Yvonne is not able to be with us, but has worked as the administrator for this project in not just a tireless, but an absolutely brilliant way to make everything happen. I'm deeply grateful to her. And of course, she's prevented from being here by possibly the only thing that could be more important than art history, which is giving birth and having a baby. And so she's not able to be with us for that reason, but she's with us in spirit, and we with her. I thought I would say, if you didn't mind, to spend a little bit of time talking about how all this came about. This project is really about people, but it's about the scholars, it's about connections, networks, it's both about the people who are making it, and in subject-wise, it's about artists as makers, it's about networks of artists, it's about patrons. But the project itself started sort of starts with institutions in the sense that and I want to talk just briefly about, if you will let me do so, about sort of the importance of a kind of institutional framework in setting this project up. The first, of course, is that the almost ridiculously hyperbolic title of Power Professor is not, as one might suspect, some sort of evil Marvel supervillain or something, but it's actually because of an artist, a displaced, if you like, a voluntary exile Australian artist, exiled not only from the medical career his family expected him to have, but also from Australia, John Power, who as left Australia for Europe in the 20s and exhibited a brand of kind of organic abstraction with the Abstraction Création group in the 1930s in Paris, and came to a realization there, perhaps through his great friendship with Otto Freundlich and a group of artists who had been unwillingly displaced from Germany into Europe, came to a realization about art's place in some kind of fundamental political struggle, a struggle for creativity, for freedom of thought and freedom of expression, a struggle that he participated in particular ways, and which actually led directly to his will, which we always forget was formulated in occupied Europe in 1939, a will which determined that after his death, and after the death of his wife, his money would be given to the University of Sydney to create an institute to to spread ideas of modern art, and particularly the latest ideas in the plastic arts to the people of Australia. Behind that, though, lay a sense that art had a fundamental mission, some role to play in Australian life and in the life of every developing and growing, and let's face it, Federation, Australia was not then a very old nation itself when he made his will. And that fundamental move led to the announcement in the early in 62 of his will and his gift to Sydney, which led to the establishment not only of the Department of Art History at the University of Sydney, but also an institute whose mission was research, publication, public engagement. That sort of so in other words, the reason we're all here, really, in some sense, deeply, is back to an artist and back to the fundamental generosity of an artist and back to the belief that Power believed that he that the gift, that his best gift was somehow ideas driven. Some of you may know that he also had the most spectacular collection of modern art, which he collected through his friends in the 20s and 30s, which he sold, and sadly everyone at the University of Sydney bemoans this. He sold it for the benefit of artists. He sold it with the proceeds going to the Artist Benevolent Fund, and so he was always interested in looking after artists too, but that's another story. But the Power Institute, as I have come to understand it, and as I think I've tried to shape it, is about trying to create projects which urgently address the fact that art is not some kind of superficial scum on the real economic waves that guide the earth or whatever, that dominate the earth, but in fact a fundamental part of what it is to be human, and a fundamental part of what it is to understand our situation politically, culturally, and in every other way. That sounds like a very grand aim, but it is essentially what motivates us all at Power to get up in the morning, and what probably motivates many art historians throughout the world. I want to say too, though, that of course, so the Power is therefore set up as a foundation. We raise money, we try to raise money for projects, we go out, we look for ways in which we can spread the word about the visual arts, we bring speakers, we organize conferences, and we get involved with complex projects such as this one. But Power's gift was also a very fundamental and more kind of easily understood one in university terms. There would be no Department of Art History at the University of Sydney without Power's gift. There was none before the gift, and that gift established a department whose importance, I think, right here and right now is not to be underestimated, because from early in its life, the department that Power established, which was known as the Power Institute or the Fine Arts Department, now known as the Department of Art History, that department has had a major role in what we might understand as the rethinking of the discipline's canons and orientations. In other words, the University of Sydney, unlike many of the universities that were its its peers, made a concerted and thorough effort to engage with the art of Asia from relatively early in its conception. There was, of course, the grand moment of first excitement, and obviously we're in the room with many people who have had a major role in that. And, I've been very proud as head of department to have a department in which, not only, of course, through John Clark, but with Thomas Berghaus and now Stephen Whiteman, to have fluent speakers of Asian languages, teaching all levels of undergraduates and postgraduates Asian art in many and complex forms, both historical and modern, and to be backed up in that by the brilliance of area studies professors like Adrian Vickers, who can turn their minds from the political to the cultural in such a deft and important way, creating, therefore, a chance for an Australian academic life to be enriched or expanded. And more importantly, I think, there is some claim, I think, at Sydney to have pioneered, in some senses, that history of the modern in Asian art, to which Eugene referred, a history which has not necessarily been the centre of attention of Asian art studies when it has existed in Western institutions in Euro-America, more particularly. So the Power Institute has one fundamental part of, and so in some ways what I'm trying to do is explain why it is that we would launch this and approach a philanthropic institution with this project. I think, though, that the other thing we have to understand is the institution we approached, which is the Getty Foundation. Now, many of you will know that it's the Getty, as currently exists, is a sort of multi-dimensional institution, itself the result of an enormous philanthropic generosity. And if you visited Los Angeles, you will sort of be, you'll be in the fortress, and you will have known that the Getty Museum, the Getty Research Institute, and the Getty Foundation are sort of three major parts of thank you so much, of a philanthropic. So I've done all that, but the Getty Foundation is a very important motor and driver of a lot that happens in art history. Now, they do this through various initiatives. You will know that for the connoisseurially minded, the Getty Provenance Index, there's an enormous amount of investment that the Getty makes in kind of oiling the wheels of our discipline in many ways. But the Connecting Art Histories, it works, for example, in conservation. Many institutions across Asia, I think even in Southeast Asia, have received grants from the Getty Conservation Institute. It's a fundamentally important institution to the running of art history. And it's also now working in the digital sphere. But the Connecting Art Histories initiative is one of their, I think, more forward-looking and kind of, I think, I think broke out of their mold or addressed a problem that they felt, which is they had sort of decided what art history was and created, taken over the running of lots of different institutions of that kind of art history. But they thought, well, hold on a minute, there must be something more. And addressing that need is how Connecting Art Histories got together, and that is their mission statement. seeks to strengthen art history as a global discipline by fostering new intellectual exchanges among scholars in targeted regions whose economic or political realities have previously prevented collaboration. It also seeks to enhance the preparation of younger scholars in countries where art history is an emerging discipline. Now, that's couched in words which some might find, things to quarrel with, but it is certainly a motor of what I would say is one of the more important grant giving initiatives of the last decade or so. And we have benefited from that, partly because of our ability to show that we can work well in partnership and because of the willingness of ITB and the NGS to help us, but also because I think the Getty was they just had no clue what was going on in Southeast Asia. The program officer said, "Oh, I didn't know this existed. I didn't," and every time a book would arrive on her desk, she'd go, "Oh, I didn't know this existed." And in a way, the Getty admitted themselves that this was terra incognita to them. They really didn't really know what was going on. And so, but they were compelled to help us because of their sense that art history can no longer be what it used to be. That if art history is to survive and thrive, they couldn't just fund. I mean, and if you go a bit deeper by clicking on this link, you would find that in fact quite a lot of their money seems to have gone to institutions which could hardly be described as either struggling or new, because they are the Zentralinstitut für Kunstgeschichte, for example, in Munich, which is about as old and established as could be. But actually, they are trying to bring those institutions together with others that need various kinds of support or who have something to offer. And I suppose what I want to say is that connecting art histories is not just the name of an initiative. It's also an ideal or a mission which is about strengthening art history for the next century. So because in some ways we are facing questions of art history's relevance, its narrowness, its inability to be a discipline for a century which is which has got various challenges which are not those of the last one or even the one before. And I think connecting art histories does set out to prove that art history is better as a fully connected discipline. It is better when streams and flows of information, archival knowledge, thought can inform and nourish each other from areas that perhaps might not have been seen. And it in some small way addresses the power imbalances that are at the heart of how art history is run. In other words, that resources, power, influence, journals, or major institutions are in a way colossally set to produce and reproduce the same kind of art history. And that connecting art histories is thus actually a far more radical initiative than it might sound. It sounds like a lovely, beneficent, a little bit paternalistic, but in fact, if pushed to its frightful conclusions, it has the seeds of something very radical, some new and fully globally oriented, fully globally cognizant discipline, one in which people will speak other languages, people will think in other ways. That, I think, is how we understood our project. So we came up, and I think Eugene has so brilliantly described all kind of the what's at stake in our title, Ambitious Alignments, that I won't go over it again. But we took very seriously the need first to bring people together, to emphasize how a kind of the knowledge and expertise built up, and you'll see in our expert group people talking all the way through and giving their reflections in the next 2 days, are some of the people that really have helped forge and create and push the field forward. And we're very grateful to Eugene, to Patrick, to TK, to John, and to all of those who have given so generously of their time, thought, effort, and just their sort of commitment. But actually, at the heart of this whole project are the people that you're going to be listening to over the next 2 days. The scholars who have, with their projects and with their own friendships, networks, and commitments and enthusiasms, have shaped and made this project. we, by various means, fair and foul, one might argue, brought this group together and tried to set off, or at least to facilitate, to catalyse those networks. But really, that work was not done in a sort of, I hope, in any spirit of trying to tell them what kind of art history they were supposed to be doing. Actually, you will hear projects which are patronage-based, projects which link, performance to art, projects which methodologically come from very different places, projects which deal with space, which deal with institutions, which deal with a whole range of topics around this, and sort of loosely around this 1945-1990 period. There was no driving methodological, we're seeking this kind of art history. We were seeking scholars. We were seeking people who would come together. And just to say very as clearly as I can ever be, what exactly we did, we created 3 meetings, one, an initial gathering in Sydney at the beginning of last year. Then, after that, we created a website and a web structure, and a call for individual projects, which we would then fund through some mobility, grant, archive money. Not a huge amount, but a certain amount that each scholar could use to propel a single project that they will be that they workshop then in Bandung with all of their with the whole group, and which they are presenting today. Over the next 2 days, I mean. And in other words, that what we were curating, in a sense, was a process by which, first, a group of people could come together. Second, that they could discuss issues of relevance and importance that they felt to the field as it was constituted. They could have a sense of what kind of art history are we participating in, what kind of field have we got. We discussed text, we had expert discussions and interventions from senior field leaders, and all the while the scholars were developing their own projects and thinking with each other and with each other's feedback about how those projects could advance. In other words, what we hoped to, and what I think we have largely been able to do, is create the sense of a cohort, a network of people who, despite all their methodological differences or their ways of approaching art history, feel themselves to be involved in some kind of collective enterprise, some kind of exploration which they are undertaking together. That has been very exciting to be a part of, to have had some role in setting up, and it is, I hope, not going to be, and here's where the preaching starts, its own a unique and solitary example. The Getty Foundation is, is relatively rare among foundations, but I'm hoping that the demonstration of the excitements that such a project can generate will have a more lasting effect, that others might be interested in helping to get involved in funding similar initiatives or prolonging this one. I'm hoping that this very project will have a second iteration and maybe a third. I'm hoping too that the National Gallery's massive commitment to, here in Singapore, to complex and thoughtful understandings of both national and regional histories and narratives, that in a sense that we've managed to sort of, I don't want to talk about perfect storms, but in terms of that there is enough alignment of aims and aspirations in the universities and particularly the galleries of the region with the kind of things that we're trying to do, that this will I think, allow us to prolong, deepen, and maintain the energy and the commitment that this project has brought about. So one could think of many ways that we could extend the project, but I think first and most importantly, we should just listen to what the scholars have to say, let them talk about their own projects, and then, as we discuss, I hope, we'll see how and why and where the field that we're sort of focusing on might be expanded or rethought. Okay, so now it really is time for coffee coming up. But I want to go back to, I'm sorry about my rather cheesy background slide, but it is actually important that I end up talking about people because, you know, I was reflecting with a couple of people over the last couple of days that this has been, for many of us involved, a wonderful human experience. I would have to profess an enormous amount of ignorance, and much of it still remains, but the process of coming to be not entirely ignorant of what goes on in Southeast Asia has not just been a sort of very salutary one for me, but also a highly enjoyable one that has put me in contact with wonderful people and institutions across this region, and is absolutely, in a human way, extremely nourishing, because in the end, and without wishing to be too preachy, I mean, this is a human endeavour, and it's about people who work together to think about the art and its place in human life in some grand way. But it's also been, I mean, you know, I have to say that it's hard to forget the great John Clarke singing Shakespeare in a karaoke bar in Bandung, or TK leading us around Borobudur, or Patrick giving us a poetic poetic polemic about where art history might be going. There have been so many wonderful high points, but those that I have practically enjoyed the most have been the intense workshop moments. You know, it's easy to write the word workshop, it's easy to write the word network, or, you know, but to actually feel one coming into being, to see scholars, I mean, just yesterday, the day before, a group of scholars were basically throwing dates on a timeline on a piece of paper, and I just stood back and thought, this is extraordinary, because in a way there was right there with a bit of paper and a lot of brains, something coming into being that I think was really important. That has been an enormous pleasure, and really my last words will be a word of thanks to all of the participants for their extraordinary level of commitment, energy, and just smarts, and just their desire to try to make their own projects and the whole larger project work. So I want to say thank you to them. I'm really hoping that I've whet your appetite now to stay after tea and to come back in greater numbers to hear what they have to say. I'm really looking forward to it myself. I hope you all are. Let's all have a cup of tea and see you back afterwards. Thank you very much.